conclude that people also are pretty consistent across long periods of time, in this case years and decades, in how depressed or how negative in mood or how positive in mood you tend to be. So some people are just, happy all the time, relatively speaking, and some people are sort of down and negative all the time or anxious all the time, relative to other people and relative to what's going on. Obviously something happens that tends to have a pretty broad effect, and everybody may, move in that direction. So something really sad happens that affects all of us in the gerontology center. Everybody will be sadder after that happens, but we'll all move relative to where we are on the neuroticism trait. So if you tend to be a happy little person, you'll be sadder than you usually are, but you'll still be happier than people who are higher in neuroticism than you ever are, even on their happy days. I think it happens at the same time during the class. So that's one thing. The other definition that is conceptually distinct, but obviously could be sort of empirically overlapping to a large degree, is there's a notion of neuroticism as being particularly reactive to stress and or particularly tuned in to your own internal signs of stress. Maybe to your own internal cues in general. And so the thought here would be that whatever your reaction to stress is, some people tend to react more than others consistently, and that one of the ways that this departs from negative trait affect is that this might be almost entirely physiological. You might not, I don't know if I can think of examples, but you might not actually have a particularly felt emotional reaction to stress, but you might, your blood pressure might shoot up, your heart rate might shoot up, your stomach might start spasming or something, or your intestines start to cramp. And so forth. So you have a really intense physiological reaction that in fact, might not have an emotional correspondence. In fact, one idea of health psych is that people who don't experience stress as an emotion have more intense physiological reactions. I'll come back to that in health psych. People have argued, for example, that part of what it means that, generally speaking, there's the usual small but reliable gender difference in neuroticism, such that women tend to be higher on neuroticism than men. Now, it could mean, because it also does tend to be true, that depression, pretty much worldwide, there's a couple of countries where this isn't true. Depression, women tend to report more depression than men do, no matter what. But it might also mean that women actually monitor their emotions more than men do. People argue that women tune into particularly the internal physical cues of emotion somewhat more than men do. There's a Costin McRae used this American psychologist paper, used the stability of neuroticism across midlife and into the later years of life to argue that older adults are not hypochondriacs because they don't show increases in neuroticism. And in fact, you can show that the increases in physical symptoms that older adults report are related to illnesses that older adults have more of, rather than hypochondriasis. So you would expect that, say, somebody who is over-reporting physical symptoms, and there is literature that shows this, people that over-report physical symptoms, people that overuse doctor visits tend to be higher on neuroticism. Costa and McCrae also had data showing that among middle-aged men who are high on neuroticism are the guys who end up in the ER with chest pain but no EKG signs of heart attack. Guys who are really low on neuroticism are the ones who end up dead because they don't go in. Seriously, because they don't go in for checkups even though they have chest pain and stuff. So you've got this. So it's quite possible that being very low on neuroticism could mean that you don't monitor your internal states enough. And it's an example of a finding that I think makes more sense in the kind of self-monitoring definition of neuroticism than in the trait negative affect kind of definition. Now, one of the things that gets a little tricky here is if you expect really high reliability over time in your depression measures, are you measuring depression anymore, or are you measuring neuroticism?
How do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. Presumably, you either wouldn't want very much reliability in your depression measures, or you'd only want short-term reliability but not long-term reliability. Like you might want reliability from week to week or month to month and untreated people. But you've got multiple year reliability, unless you have good reason to think that people are chronically depressed, you probably have a trait measure rather than a state measure. And there's a whole literature about the interrelationship of the underlying traits and presumed state measures and so forth. It goes beyond what we probably want to talk about today. Extroversion, introversion, I think is probably the most widely known and most widely understood measure. It means exactly what you think it means. Openness to experience. It's a little tricky again. It's often one of the relatively less reliable measures. When they were having these lit reviews and this discussion about what to call things, one of the discussions was whether what many people were calling openness to experience really should be intelligence. And if you look at the item in openness scales, you can see that. A lot of the items are items that if they're not straight out intelligence items, they're items that sort of pick up on the kind of things that you would think highly educated, intelligent people might do. Like you tend to get items about, I really like going to art museums. I like listening to classical music. I really like to debate philosophical ideas with my friends. The concept is what you would expect it to be from the name of the factor, that this should be people high on this should be people who are flexible and open to doing new things and ready to try new stuff and continually challenging themselves. And that low openness should be people who are traditionalists, who like to keep doing things the way they've always done them, who would be change resistant. I've had another reason lately to try to look at this for a research project I've been putting together and looking at some different openness scales, and I couldn't find anything based on item content that I thought got very close to that. So I think it's always useful to kind of look at the item content as well as some of the validity measures to see what you think. And it comes around again in discussions of like preserving intelligence. You'll see people will measure openness in middle age and say, well, that predicts maintenance of intelligence later in life, which would be great if openness was measuring what it's supposed to measure. If it's actually another measure of intelligence, then all it's telling you is that intelligence system is stable across that period of time, which we already used. So you have this kind of tension about what this really is and what it means. Conscientiousness, again, means pretty much